nature.in. And let me just quickly go through some guidelines or some rules that we have for these webinars. First one would be all of your mics have been muted from our end, from the admin end. So you all won't be able to unmute your mic. So don't worry if you're not able to speak, but you will be able to hear every single little thing that has been discussed on this particular webinar. Secondly, there is a number that will be flashed on your screen. You can take a note of that. I will come to the number a little later. All you need to do is you can send your questions to that particular number. The entire flow of the webinar would be, for the first half an hour, our speaker will be speaking on the topic given here on the screen, that is cybersecurity for educators. And after that, we will move on to a question answer session. Coming back to our speaker himself, as you can see on your screen, his name is Sai Sushanth. He is a cyber law expert and a techno-legal consultant. He is also the CEO of Sushanth IT Law Associate. He is an avid speaker and a legal mentor. He has authored many books in the same genre that he's an expert in. If I can say something in one line, people who are in trouble when it comes to cybersecurity are the people who don't want to be in trouble when it comes to cybersecurity. All of them go to him. So he's the man you should contact if you want to know anything about cybersecurity. That I think is the best introduction I could give about him. So he will be speaking for the first 30 to 35 minutes. And after that, we will have a question answer session. We will be flashing the number on your screen right away. Can we have the number on the screen, please? Yes. So this is the number +91 7619 550091. I repeat, +91 7619 550091. So you can WhatsApp your questions to this particular number with your name and your city, and our editor, Ms. Varsha Prasad, will later on moderate the question answer sessions, and she will communicate your questions to our speaker. For those of you who have friends who are not able to get into this meeting room here today, this is to inform you that we have already we have maxed out our limit of 500 participants. So thank you so much for showing so much of love towards the teacher.in. But if you have friends who are trying to log into this particular webinar and not able to, we have already started a YouTube live of this particular session on the teacher.in YouTube channel. The message has been flashing in the waiting room, but you can also send the message to them saying they only need to go to the teacher.in YouTube channel and they will find the the live streaming of this entire session there. So it is streaming live on YouTube as we speak. So they will be able to attend the entire session on YouTube live too. And if they have any questions, they can send the questions to this particular number. And depending on the time that we have, we will address those questions as well. So whether you're here on in this meeting room or in the YouTube or watching on the YouTube live streaming, that does not matter. If time permits, we will definitely ask your questions. Not a problem at all. And please spread the message to your friends who are not able to log in. So without further ado, I would request our speaker here today to take the session forward. Oh yes, before we move on, this is an information for all of you, all of our participants here today. Our next session is going to be a special session, which is on May 14th. The reason I say special is we usually have our webinars on Saturday at 10:30 a.m. But this particular session is a midweek session that we're going to have, which is on 14th May 2020 at 10:30 a.m. And our speaker is going to be Dr. Kamala Mukunda. She is a well-known author with her book right there on your screen, What Did You Ask at School Today? Many of you who would have read her book already. She's extremely good when it comes to learning environments for children, and she would be our speaker. And the information for this and the registration link for this will be sent out by today in the evening, and all of you can start registering for the same by this evening. So we will now move on to our speaker here today, Mr. Sai Sushanth. If you could please take over and go ahead with our topic that we have. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I first of all, a very good morning to all of you present in the webinar today. And the moment you see that there is somebody addressing you on the legal front, I'm sure that all of you would be confused why this guy has come here and then why is he talking about law sections. And this is the usual response that I evoke on the face of people when I start a session. So because I'm sure that since the video is not visible here, I'm sure I can see a lot of faces like this if the video is switched on. So hoping that I will be not confining myself to any sections or cross sections, because I believe if I do that, there will only be dissections, and I don't intend to do that. So that's something that I thought of just calling and then intimating all of you here. So am I audible basically? Because I got some messages that I'm not audible.
Sushanth,
okay.
You're very audible, Sushanth.
Okay, thank you so much, please. Thank you. Go to the next slide, please. See, the moment you're talking about cybersecurity, see, the first question that comes into your mind is why? What am I got to do with cybersecurity? Well, I'm a principal, I'm a faculty, I'm just running my educational institution. What has cybersecurity got to do with me? That's the first question that comes to anybody's mind. Well, if you're using any of these 7 things that go on to form the digital ecosystem, then 100% you would be required to know something about cyber securities and cyber law specifically. If you're using computers, computer systems, computer networks, computer resources, communication devices, and also data and information in the electronic form, then definitely you have to be aware about cyber security and cyber laws thereof. So because these are some specific things that are totally out of the box. So any person, whether it's your professional wise or it's your personal front or anything, the moment you're making use of any of these, I think definitely you would have to be aware of cyber security and cyber laws to that extent. So I won't take much time. I'll try to confine myself to a few aspects, but I'd just like to make a disclaimer before I start off. My intention is not to scare away people by showing some case studies and sharing out some kinds of cybersecurity breaches that have taken place in the education front, specifically in the domain of online education. I just wish to put these forward because the first step towards addressing any of these cyber breach or cybersecurity breach is to stay aware. So I believe that that kind of an awareness could come in case we have some kind of discussion with this regard to these case studies. So that is the whole intention of my presentation today, and I would like to start off with this particular case study that has come to me. See, a lot of us today, specifically in the online domain, specifically online meetings or online education domain, are using a lot of video conferencing tools, whether it's a Zoom, whether it's the WebEx, whether it's the Adobe Connect, and whether it's a Google Meet of the world. We have a simple phenomena. We think that all of these are safe, and we can go ahead and try to use any of these. But let me try to tell you something. All these are reasonably safe and reasonably secured, because they can never be something which is 100% secured in the cyber domain. So we need to understand this gospel truth before we get forward, because this is a thorough misconception that is there in the minds of not just people like us, but it's in the minds of every common man who's using these online tools and who's doing something on the internet. So so much so that the complete dependence has gone on today to be online. So all these kinds of webinars also are done online. So just like to start off, I got this wonderful case wherein a school started hosting online classes through its video conferencing tool. I don't want to name the particular tool, but yes, they started using that tool for conducting their online classes. And so much so that there was a small instance that has happened. The class is taking place in the morning between 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. And incidentally, in the evening, a lot of students, especially the girl students, as well as some faculties who are specifically women faculty, have been struck with the problem. Well, what's the problem? They got a call that uh, there is a special lockdown service that has been provided by them, and the cost is 1,000 rupees per service. Well, they were absolutely astonished. They did not have any idea why this kind of a scenario has taken place. They did a kind of due diligence online. They went up to social media. They searched about their name, and they were shocked to see that a fake profile of theirs was created using the same photograph that was used in the online classroom, because online classrooms enable video also. So therefore, a screenshot has been taken of the same, and then a real phone number, real details of the faculty and the girl students were put up on social media, and a tag was put up telling that they were providing special lockdown services. So this could be the kind of scenario that could happen to any one of us who are specifically using online meetings or online video conferencing platforms to conduct classes and to conduct a lot of meetings and sessions. So I think we need to be alive to the fact that as a school, specifically, what is my liability? What is the landscape of liability? Well, I have not created that. I have not facilitated that. Neither am I aware of the same. So how would the school be liable? Is the school liable? So all of these questions came to me. Well, to put it in a nutshell, the school would be liable because it has to exercise its due diligence under the law in order to ensure that its liability goes down to the bare minimum. So, well, how do you ensure that you have documented due diligence? We'll discuss that as we go forward. But this is just to tell you that though you think that everything is fine and everything is going smooth, but there could be certain hiccups like this that could have also exposed us not just from a legal perspective, but also from a professional and personal perspectives. So this is a kind of legal exposure that people would have in case they're going ahead and using online video conferencing tools for conducting meetings in classrooms. So this is one wake-up call to all of us. We may think everything is fine, but we need to stay alive that this is a typical scenario that could happen anywhere, even in this webinar. So that's the reason I thought of just beginning with this. So let's go a bit further. Can you go to the next slide, please? Yeah. So like I said, there are lots of people who are trying to make cyber statistic pleasures. So like I discussed with you, the phone number, the pictures may be put, and all these are something like invitation to offer, because you may not directly be offering the same, but they are all inviting the people attraction, and then people would start going hanky panky with regard to such issues. Let's go to the next slide, please. Yeah. Now, when you look at this scenario, Oakland and Berkeley, so there was a beautiful, wonderful case, especially during this period of Corona and then pandemic. I think lots of schools across the globe have started to go online for their classes and then for conducting exams. Well, the students in Oakland and Berkeley, their data was exposed during the online learning, because, like I said, it's a very small percentage of us that are aware that we require some kind of a cyber security in kind of this online webinars, because it becomes really essential that we not only protect the faculty, but also we protect the students who are attending this classrooms and your sessions, because privacy and cyber security are the two golden rules that all of us need to keep in mind while we're making use of online learning. And this kind of a security breach has exposed a lot of privacy data of students, and then a lot of personal information. We'll be discussing what is that personal information and sensitive information in a while. But just to tell you that these kinds of data of students, it's not just the faculty that could be exposed, or the school that could be exposed, or the content that could be exposed, but the privacy of the students could also be exposed in such kinds of online meetings, in case proper due diligence has not been adopted, especially by the schools organizing meetings. So this is one such case. Just go on to the next one. Next slide, please. Yes. I think it's not just the Oakland and Berkeley, but students in California, and also the schools in the Californian districts have also started to face cyber security breaches. A lot of us, when we do online meetings, we do share out the meeting ID and passwords. And at times, it becomes really important that we share it in the right community, because the moment you share that out in the public domain, I think there could be a lot of people intruding into. We've seen a lot of instances that happened. And recently, there was a case where a faculty was taking an online class to the students, and an unauthorized access has taken place, and a person who's not related in any manner to the school has joined the meeting, and he started creating chaos. And this could be one such area that schools need to be extensively looking at. And these kinds of cyber security breaches are going to be the order of the day as we go forward. Let's go to the next slide, please. This slide tells us that the cyber attacks have started scaring away and withering away schools from exercising online classrooms, and they've started to slowly put up an emphasis on cyber security and online security, more so when the privacy and the security of the faculty and students, and any person who's made a participant or a host to this webinar, their cyber security is breached. So these kinds of instances are enabling more and more education institutions to put up an emphasis on cyber security, start coming up with specific guidelines and policies to address and strengthen their cyber security, so as to go and proceed further in this era of online learning. Let's go to the next slide, please. Well, hackers and cyber criminals have started to evolve their attack methods, and specifically when it comes to higher education. When a lot of times that the higher education students and classrooms have been now been made a target by a lot of hackers and cyber criminals, because they would like to get up a lot of information which is shared across in the classroom, whether it's the name or whether it's the other details of the students and things like that. But now higher education has now been made the toast of the times, because with online learning coming up in a massive way in this higher education, I think the cyber criminals are being opportunistic in absolutely exploiting the vulnerabilities thereof. Next slide, please. In a rush where all of us in this pandemic situation have immediately started to evolve and adapt to online learning, it becomes so much so important that we also pay attention to cyber security and also understand the nuances of student privacy and faculty privacy and things like that, because the rush in going ahead and coming up with online teaching, online classrooms, have exposed a lot of schools to cyber attacks, whether it's the identity thefts, whether it's phishing, whether it's ransomware, and a lot of other attacks that are likely to be targeted in case no proper due diligence is adopted by the schools. Next slide, please. Yes, a lot of times sensitive personal data and the personal data of students and faculty and the people who are accessing online meetings have been put to a large amount of risk. And then there are, of course, though the universities and the educational institutions are trying to come up with certain privacy mechanisms, but it becomes very important that they stay alive to the updation of these requirements, because it's not just enough that you have your policies and security frameworks and then say that, well, I'm done. So that's not the end of it. So though everything may appear to be smooth, but still there could be a lot of legal exposure, because on a daily basis, a lot of cyber crimes are taking place during this period of COVID-19 and pandemic situation. Next slide, please. When I look at this case, a data breach that has taken place in Maricopa community colleges has really breached 2.4 million students and employees' personal data. Well, this is a learning lesson that data breach is not just going to be impacting the information and the communication that's happening over an online classroom, but that could potentially expose the personal data of almost all the participants and the students and the faculties of the school, because they would be put to a cyber security risk, because in case the proper due diligence and mechanisms have not been adopted and then not been updated, then this could be one possible scenario that could expose not just the students and faculties data, but that could also create a lot of legal liabilities to schools and educational institutions by and large. Next slide, please. This scenario is one such unique scenario. The students' data has been sent to 1,100 students accidentally by an employee who was working in this particular institution. So, of course, they did not carry any kinds of social security numbers or any birth rates, but yes, a lot of student data accidentally got leaked out due to the lack of due diligence and negligence of a particular employee. So this becomes important that we as schools, educational institutions ensure that proper cyber hygiene and cyber maturity is being practiced, not just at the online meetings front, but also at the academic front and also in the administration front, so as to ensure that no accidental data breaches can take place over such kinds of scenarios, so as to ensure that your exposure to law and legal liability is bare minimum. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. When you look at this scenario, there have been a lot of scenarios that have been taking place. Australian University has now come up with the online examination mechanism, despite the fact that there are a lot of student concerns. So I think if we are slowly trying to adopt online examination, online invigilation, it becomes very increasingly important that you stay alive to the fact that there are lots of lurking dangers that are arising out of that kinds of issues, and we need to be constantly updating our policies, have proper due diligence, have set of guidelines, and update them as and when things are happening in the world, and ensure that your legal exposure is reduced to the bare minimum. Next slide, please. Yes. So this is one very important concept that I thought of just bringing into picture, because all along we've been just talking about due diligence. We've been talking about legal exposure. Well, when you look at Indian law specifically, we have in India a law which is called as Information Technology Act. It is the Indian cyber law largely, and there are also certain rules and regulations made there under. So these laws primarily give out legal recognition to any transaction that is carried out through an electronic medium, whether it's your online classroom, whether it's your online exam. All of these are given legal validity and legal sanctity by this particular legislation. So all I want to tell is that if you're a school, if you're an educational institution, well, you're now being covered under Section 21W of the Information Technology Act, specifically under the ambit of intermediary. So there's a definition that's come up. So in a nutshell, I would just like to tell you that in case you're an institution collecting, processing, storing any particular sensitive information or personal information of any particular individual, and you're providing any service with respect to such information, you get qualified as an intermediary. So it's no longer going to be the Airtels of the world. It's no longer going to be the telecom service providers. It's no longer going to be the internet service providers, but you as an educational institution and as a school conducting online classrooms, online examinations, online meetings, online sessions would also be qualified under the ambit of intermediary. Next slide, please. So this is a game changer, because apart from being an intermediary, the moment you're hosting any of your online meetings over any network, you get qualified as a network service provider. So specifically, any school, any college, any educational institution, or any particular faculty who's providing online classes to its students typically get qualified as a network service provider under the law. So what is that? What does that mean to you? So if you're a network service provider, there are certain kinds of legal due diligence and compliance obligations that you need to do as a school, as a educational institution, as an intermediary, and as specifically as a network service provider. Next slide, please. So three things: there are no magical phenomena, there are no golden rules, but basically, if you're able to just appreciate and understand these three, I think you're relatively safe. The first thing is you need to have in place reasonable security practices and procedures. You must have due diligence under the law, and the moment you have these two, you're exempt from liability. So zero liability is what the law has in place for you. So everything can be hunky dory in case you have in place all the requisites under the law. Next slide, please. So with a lot of these national lockdowns getting extended, and with this pandemic situation not still coming to a halt, I think online education has received a totally new dimension in the present world. So a lot of schools, no matter the size of the school, a lot of individual faculties are trying to make use of online classrooms to train and educate students. I think this is one such area that has just seen a rampant rise thanks to the lockdowns and the pandemic situation. Next slide, please. I think this is one important principle that all of us need to be aware as an individual and as a school and as an academic institution. A couple of days ago, an Indian IT giant, Cognizant, was impacted with a cyber attack. Well, this is something called ransomware, which is also specifically called as maze ransomware. Well, we might have seen a lot of instances where people earlier used to kidnap and demand a ransom. Well, gone are those days. Now things are very simple. The cyber criminals are bringing their eyes on your systems, and absolutely they're being opportunistic in exploiting or each and every vulnerability and loophole that is existing. And they're making use of a lot of mobile applications and these video conferencing tools and the applications that are used in our daily life for spreading out malware that specifically arises to be ransomware in the near future. So basically, you will receive a message that your system is locked, and you will have to make a payment to the cyber criminals, specifically in cryptocurrency, that too in bitcoins, and then only then your password for the devices would be released. Well, I've seen a lot of these cases in practical scenarios because we deal by and large with IT companies, and then this could probably happen to any one of us, whether we are an IT employee or not. Basically, if you're making use of internet, mobile phone, and computer, I think we are all amenable to this wonderful attack called ransomware. This has been the new jewel in the crown, and then has been seeing a lot of targets have been used by this ransomware. It's not just the huge companies, but it's also a common individual person. Next slide, please. So I think it's becomes really important that you incorporate cybersecurity in your learning management system, because today with the digital classrooms and online teaching being the de facto modes, I think cybersecurity assumes a significant place, specifically in order to ensure that there are no data breaches, there are no cybersecurity breaches, because when you look at our Indian Information Technology Act, well, today they have come up with certain specific guidelines stating that, well, earlier when you look at the law, the cap was 1 crore per contravention. So anything that is going wrong, you could only sue somebody up to 1 crore rupees, Indian rupees. But now when the act has been amended in the year 2008, I think this cap is removed, and now unlimited damages could be enforced for a data breach. So it becomes very important that cybersecurity is adopted and it's constantly updated in your learning management system so as to avoid your legal exposure to such issues. Next slide, please. The first thing that you as a school or an educational institution or as an individual faculty need to understand is is our LMS cyber secure? So how do you understand that? So does it provide for any passwords? Does it have any authentication? We've been seeing a lot of two-factor authentications that are happening, but the uh, look at this kind of a webinar where Zoom has now been cyber resilient, because though it had a lot of cyber security issues, it has been alive to the fact that it has constantly been working on the updates, and now it has made certain guidelines mandatory. For example, all of you who had joined this webinar prior to the time were supposed to be entered into a waiting room. So typically, the waiting room has now been mandatory by this application called Zoom. And not just that, passwords and meeting IDs have been made mandatory for any host of any meetings through this platform. So relatively, I would say that though there are a lot of cybersecurity breaches that are happening over these video conferencing tools, I think lots of work is happening, and companies like Zoom are trying to stay alive to the fact that there is a lot of scope to amend and come up with patches which are specifically looping out this cybersecurity breaches to a large extent. So this is one such area that you as a school or an educational institution need to constantly be looking at. Next slide, please. Yes, this is one thing I'm not going to have much emphasis, but all I wish to tell you is, in case your international schools, you do have students from international countries, and specifically European Union. I think we need to stay alive to the fact that now, if you're having any kinds of international students, specifically students from the European Union, you need to ensure that you have GDPR compliance in place. What is this GDPR? In a nutshell, it is something called a general data protection regulation that has been passed by the European Union on the on the 25th of May, and then last year, and then a lot of legal liabilities have been imposed for non-compliance. So they start off from 4% of your global turnover, or 4 crores of rupees, whichever is higher. So I would ensure that in case schools are having international students, it becomes increasingly important that they ensure that their LMS is GDPR compliant. Now, it's not just the course related information or the PPTs or the content that is going to be looked at by the cyber criminals. Well, a lot of cyber criminals are essentially targeting the sensitive personal information or data of students during online classes. Next slide, please. Yes, so much so that a lot of these users' data, that is the participants' data, is inadvertently disclosed on Facebook without proper disclosure to the same and without proper intimation to any of its users. There are a lot of these platforms that are doing the same. I would not want to name any of these, but in the interest of all of you, I just want to tell you that yes, you as a school will have to now exercise more duty of care and caution while making use of any of these video conferencing tools. Next slide, please. Yeah, a lot of educational portals would require certain guidelines and policies in the midst of online learning, because it increasingly becomes important that you have the due diligence and the legal policies to ensure that your compliance to the law and cybersecurity measures have been adopted by your institution. Now, a lot of students' data and privacy also needs to be taking a higher step, more specifically in the light of online education. Next slide, please. I think online education is seeing a completely different phenomena with artificial intelligence coming in. I think a lot of educational platforms, whether it's the video conferencing tools or the LMS, a lot of these platforms are making use of something called artificial intelligence. And these artificial intelligence pose in a lot of cyber security, legal and security ramifications, which we all need to be alive of. Not just that, now increasingly with online education being the de facto mode by all the schools, I think a lot of schools are trying to consider facial recognition for their online attendance of classes, because it increasingly is becoming important that they gauge the attendance of the students, specifically with regard to the online education and online classrooms and online educational training that has been imparted hereof. Next slide, please. I think Darknet, this is all something that is not at all heard of and not spoken of in any kinds of webinars like this. I just want to tell you that there is something which we have not seen. There's the other side of the net. So the picture clearly states that, see, look at the net we access and look at the Darknet. The Darknet is seeing a lot of glow nowadays, specifically since it cannot be accessed by anybody other than people who are using specific browsers like Onion routing browsers and things like that. But a lot of cyber criminals are making use of Darknet to commit a lot of cyber crimes across the globe. I think schools and online learning is no exception. It's not immune. I think a lot of activities can take place over the Darknet, and this could include selling the pictures, privacy, and related information, the personal and sensitive information of students, faculties, and the content could also be, by and large, sold across for a small amount of consideration in the Darknet. Next slide, please. While we do a lot of activities using our mobile phone, it becomes increasingly important to stay alive to the fact that when we upload any of our pictures to any of the social media websites or any of the over-the-top applications, I think we need to quickly realize that a lot of cyber security issues are happening. So when a mobile phone is used for uploading a photograph, I think the exact location can be traced, the latitude and longitude can be specifically traced. So this is all I wanted to tell you regarding the uploading of photographs. So act with caution, because your location per se could be tracked down not just by an unknown person, but by a lot of cyber criminals who are being very opportunistic in this kind of a scenario. Next slide, please. WhatsApp being the de facto mode in India, I think everything that's gone ahead, we're able to maintain social distancing. I think we cannot stay out of social media distancing. I think this is the ground reality that we need to wake up to. And a lot of things are happening around WhatsApp. But for people who are using WhatsApp, I just like to tell you that when you look at the terms and conditions of WhatsApp, it's clear. Anything that I'm sharing, audio, video, image, or text, that becomes information in the public domain. Once it becomes information in public domain, I can no longer seek a legal remedy. So, so much being so, it is very essential that you do not share out any of your students' information or data using WhatsApp, more specifically in the light of exposing the privacy of students by and large. Next slide, please. Now, with this new Supreme Court judgment, a right to privacy has become the fundamental right of each and every individual. I think this slide says it all, because a right to privacy is now being made the fundamental right of each and every citizen of the country. So it becomes really important that you, as a faculty, as a school, as an educational institution, stay alive to the fact that any breach of privacy would be resulting in breaching a fundamental right, which could expose you to a lot of legal issues by way of writs, which could be filed in the High Court and the Supreme Courts. So this is something that I would like to increasingly tell you, and more specifically, that a lot of privacy obligations need to be inculcated in the educational institutions and schools, so much so to protect this fundamental right to privacy. Next slide, please. Now, the law has come up with something called sensitive personal data or information. So what's this? In short, your passwords, whether it's created or automated, financial information, biometric information, sexual orientation, which is about the gender-related information, health and medical records. So all this become the sensitive personal data or information of an individual. So the moment you're handling, processing, storing any of these sensitive personal information or data, you get qualified as an intermediary, specifically under 21W, what I was talking about. So you need to exercise due diligence and have in place reasonable security practices and procedures. Now, there's an exception. Any information that is disclosed under Right to Information Act is not covered under the ambit of sensitive personal data. So all these disclosures under RTI, they're exempt from being called sensitive data. So next slide, please. The law has also come up with something called personal information. So any information with which I can identify an individual, that specifically is now coined to be personal information. And I need to be aware that when I'm the same thing as we spoke of with regard to sensitive personal data also is equally applicable with regard to personal information. Next slide, please. So the law says three things. Comply with the law, exercise your due diligence, do not partner with somebody who's violating the law. If these things are followed, I think life is safe. You don't do that, you get exposed to two kinds of liabilities. There's an exposure to civil and criminal liabilities. Next slide, please. So there could be exposure to civil liabilities, that is damages by way of compensation of up to 5 crore rupees per contravention, and criminal liabilities ranging from 3 years to life imprisonment and a fine ranging from 1 lakh rupees to 10 lakh rupees. I think these are the legal exposures that you as intermediaries and network service providers need to be constantly aware of while you're exercising online classrooms. Next slide, please. I think this is some other regulation. You could also be exposed to 25,000 legal Indian rupees. Next slide, please, for your non-compliance as an intermediary. Next slide, please. Now, what if I'm exposed? What is the landscape of legal liability? Well, it's simple. It's not just going to be the school. It's going to be the top management of the school. It's going to be the middle management on each and every faculty who was responsible for such breach, provided you will be exempt from liability in case you had no knowledge of the same, in case you have not exercised negligence, but in case you have exercised due diligence. So I think these three are the fundamental keys that you as a school or an educational institution or as a faculty need to be aware of. Next slide, please. I think this is one more area that I would like to talk of. There are a lot of intellectual property issues arising out of your LMS, specifically when you're making use of third-party learning management systems. I think there are lots of intellectual property. When you look at the terms and conditions of these learning management platforms, we need to specifically understand who is going to own the content which has been shared through this learning management system or video management systems, because we put in a lot of R&D and we come up with increasingly good amount of information, and which is unique, which has a lot of intrinsic value, and it becomes so much so important that you have proper legal protection to such content which is generated out of your effort and as also out of your study and research. So we need to understand that the IP ownership and the content ownership also needs to be specifically looked into while selecting your learning management systems or an online conferencing tool. Next slide, please. So these are two slides. I think I just want to quickly tell you that these are the 5 different slides that I'm making use of to just to tell you something about what's the law saying about. So the moment you're doing something without the permission of the computer owner, or you're doing something without proper authorization, you're accessing, securing access, yes, you're covered. You're downloading, copying, extracting data, yes, you're covered. You're introducing a computer contaminant. Well, let me just put a small emphasis on this. A lot of times, learning management systems and video conferencing tools come up with computer contaminants. I'll tell you how. US faculties and educational institutions and schools need to be alive that the moment I'm sharing out the links of these webinars, I must ensure that a proper due diligence is done from my end, do a proper antivirus scan, ensure that I have an antivirus system up and running, update it, and do some kinds of due diligence mechanisms, and then share out the information. Why? Because the moment you do not exercise your due diligence, and as a result, there is some computer contaminant, whether it's a virus, malware, or it's a worm, or it's a Trojan, anything that could disrupt the normal functioning of a system. Well, you could be the person who has introduced that. Factually, you've not done anything. You've just shared the information. But if failing to exercise your due diligence can expose you to legal liabilities. So this is one such area I would like to tell you. And do any of these providing illegal access. That is, you're not supposed to provide any access to a particular individual. You provide access. You're making use of the internet of some other person. You're covered. You're destroying, diminishing the value and utility of a document, of a presentation, of a content. You could be still liable. And if you're disrupting the normal functionality of a computer or network, yes, you could be liable. And if you're causing denial of access, so this becomes very important, because today's limitation with regard to the online classrooms, the moment you're not exercising due care and caution, if a number is more, and you do not have access control mechanisms, and then make other people enter into this meeting room without authorization, you're disrupting, you're causing denial of access, legitimate access to people who are specifically required to attend this particular webinar or session. So, so much so that there have been a lot of scenarios. I will just tell you one such scenario. In recent times, when you look at the cybersecurity breaches that I've shown you in the earlier slides, there was one such breach that has made an exposure that any person with a Google ID, that is, if you have a Gmail account, you could get access to this particular online classroom, which was conducted by a particular school, which is hosted by one particular school. So much so that this was completely filled up, and legitimate students could not get access to that classroom. Well, in this kind of a scenario, if you don't exercise your caution and duty of care, you could face legal exposure. Next slide, please. If you're trying to make use of stolen computers, stolen mobile phones for accessing these webinars, hosting these webinars, well, you'll now not just be covered under this ambit for using a stolen computer device, but you'll also be accused of data theft. So the imprisonment is also mentioned there. I'm not getting forward. Next slide, please. I think identity thefts are the new phenomenon in this online learning, because a lot of times the identity of the students is misused. Specifically, when I share out this meeting ID and ask any of my friends to log in, I can do that by entering my name, because any of these video conferencing tools do not give you specific obligations to enter your name. When you don't enter your name, your device name is automatically deemed to be the one which you're logging to. So typically, if you're having the same mobile device as mine, and then you're trying to use that, I can steal your identity and then start using that. So it becomes very important that we stay alive to these kinds of scenarios. There are lots of identity thefts that are taking place, specifically in the online classrooms, and lots of information has been gathered by the cyber criminals by making use of identity thefts. Next slide, please. Cheating by impersonation. This is also emerging to be the new jewel in the crown, because when I tried to do something online, I got this wonderful question during one of my webinars where people said, look, I have just given my phone to someone else, and they have sent some kind of defamatory content and abusive content from my phone. So who's liable? I have not done that. Well, since the originating message appears to be originating from you, so it becomes increasingly important that you exercise your due care. This can happen in an online classroom wherein the teacher can give some sort of questions or guidelines to their students, specifically in the chat window that they are making use of. And unfortunately, if the meeting room is compromised, then and somebody tries to use abusive language from the account of the teacher or the faculty to the students, I think it exposes the teacher who's hosting that class to legal liability, because so much so that in case you're not exercised due care. We'll be talking about due care in a while, but this is just one instance to show what kinds of legal ramifications which are required to be exercised by you as a faculty. These are some instances of some legal ramifications. Next slide, please. No exposure to personal privacy. So this has seen light specifically when you look at the instances where the personal privacy was breached. When you look at the instance that has happened a couple of days back, wherein Smriti Irani had lodged a complaint against Fab India in this scenario where they had put up. It was alleged that they put up cameras in their dressing rooms. But here I would just like to tell you something. For all of you that who are making use of online classrooms, you're typically asking your students to switch on their video and then get connected. Well, once you're doing that, you must ensure that there are proper guidelines addressing the same. Because in case the student is sitting in an inappropriate or an unappropriate position, that could expose a lot of their personal privacy to the world, and it could be misused. So in case of such misuse, your landscape of liability is that the school and the educational institution, and specifically the faculty, in case you're not exercised due diligence, would also face legal exposure. So this is equally applicable not just to students, but also to faculties who are hosting video training and classrooms. Next slide, please. Ransomware that I discussed is become the new horizon, because a lot of schools are now getting targeted, because there are lots of ransomware attacks that have been generated, because it's very important that the systems and the mobile phones that you're making use of are also having adequate security measures in place in order to avoid ransomware attacks. Well, there are no magical principles or golden phenomenons, but however, it becomes increasingly important that the device that you're making use of for connecting and hosting to these webinars and online classrooms are adequately protected, and do not install any mobile applications that are going to hamper or that are going to meddle with your security of the phone, because that could expose your phone to ransomware. But it could not just be your phone, but a lot of information that is residing in the phone could also be exposed to cyber criminals. Next slide, please. Your IoT devices. I think this is one such unique scenario. The other day, I just got this wonderful case. A lot of us today make use of a lot of IoT devices, whether it's the Alexas, whether it's the Google Homes, or whether it's any of the IoT devices. If you have any of your IoT devices when you're sharing out your online classrooms, think twice, because these IoT classrooms, the IoT devices have the capability to record and store a lot of information that is getting transmitted through your voice. So specifically, I'll tell you this instance that has happened. There was a faculty who was talking about one particular aspect, and there she was trying to talk about one particular faculty in that webinar. And unfortunately, the information got out in the public domain, because there was a breach of confidentiality, and this IoT device has interpreted that and hosted that on YouTube. And as a result, a defamation case was lodged against the faculty for specifically making use of abusive and derogatory language. So it becomes important that you stay out of this. So stay out of these smart and IoT devices, even your mobile phones. When you look at your mobile phones, increasingly you will have to realize that just do an exercise. Once this webinar is done, go back, put your mobile phone near you, start talking about anything that's under the sky. Talk of a movie, talk of an actor, talk of a subject, and a few minutes later, when you switch on your mobile phone, you will be surprised to note that all the content relating to your discussion would be displayed. So this is the kinds of privacy issue that these devices have in place. So I would urge everybody, because nowadays we're being smart, we're thinking that we are smart, but I'm so sorry to tell you that we have been negligent in adopting reasonable security practices. Next slide, please. So more specifically, I would just like to tell you that whatever you do, whether it's through your IoT device or through any online classrooms, all this is legal evidence and can be used in a court of law, because everything that is digital becomes a digital evidence, and we do have the law relating to the evidence which has been amended specifically to include the admissibility of digital evidence. So digital evidence is now being used increasingly by a lot of people who are raising cybercrime complaints, because whether this is audio, video, image, or text, think twice before you're doing that, because this is legal evidence and could be used against you. Next slide, please. I think there are lots of cyber crimes that are taking place in the online educational domain. This is not just this is just an illustrative list, and this is not an exhaustive list. So I think unauthorized access, like I told you, a lot of unauthorized access activities are taking place in these video classrooms and video meetings. So I think we need to be constantly alive to the fact. Identity theft and cheating by impersonations are becoming to be the two good popular phenomena that are taking place, specifically in the online classroom phenomenon. Phishing. Phishing is something that's creating a fake login page such that it is resembling the original. It's almost like a look-like. So you can say a lot of these online webinars or online meetings, there are phishing attacks being targeted. So you will have a same screen as your original LMS or your original video hosting tools. The moment you enter your user ID and passwords, you will be directed to some other page, and there you will be either you may have an error or you may be redirected to enter the details once again. So we may think that there is something that has gone wrong, typically my connectivity issue, and then we may try to enter our information once again. Well, that being so, the first time that you enter your information, the information is already passed on to the cyber criminal. And this is a typical scenario that usually takes place with regard to online frauds, specifically involving financial frauds, whether it's the net banking or online banking or the social media, etc. But today, that is increasingly also getting popular in the domain of online education. Ransomware, like I said, is going to be a natural fertile corollary, specifically in the domain of online education. Next slide, please. Yes, please pause here. Yeah. Cybersecurity guidelines. These are some cybersecurity guidelines that I would like to talk of for an education institution. These are These are just illustrative instances. Well, we're seeing a lot of cyber crimes happening every day, every minute. So it becomes increasingly important that we stay updated with the same. So out of just sharing with you some of the experiences and the security guidelines that I have collated in my experience. So you should specifically have online classroom policies and guidelines. Well, the government has notified today that it is going to come up with some guidelines relating to online classrooms. Well, that could be a model that would typically be used, but that's not all of it. I think we constantly need to be adopting to the specific instances of how you're carrying out your online classrooms. This is one area. Online classroom policies, faculty. Now, increasingly, the educational institutions and the schools also need to have certain specific policies and guidelines for faculties, especially who are hosting online classrooms and online meetings. And online education policy needs to be framed by the educational institution so as to ensure that what are the parameters that are going to be spoken of, specifically what are the cybersecurity guidelines that will be required to be exercised by the schools, by the school students, and the faculties would have to be specified in such policy. Now, data protection, it becomes important that you protect the data protection of not just students, but also the faculty and also the school who's hosting online classrooms. So specific data protection agreements and policies need to be looked into, and privacy policy needs to be put in because we're all intermediaries under the law, and specifically the rule 3 subsection 1 obligates that I need to specifically have a privacy policy. The privacy policy ingredients are also mentioned. I do not have time to discuss the same. Well, all I want to tell you is that a privacy policy specifically to online learning has to be adopted given the domain of online learning. Next slide, please. I think the intellectual property also becomes relatively important and assumes significance, specifically relating to the content which has been shared out in the online learning classrooms. So it becomes very important that you have adequate IP protection policies, have, like I said, look at the content policies, content ownership with regard to LMS and the video conferencing tools. So that is one increasingly good area. And a lot of schools have now begun to think of cyber and data insurance because the online data is becoming very important, not just for protecting you and your organization, but it's also increasingly important that you ensure that your goodwill and reputation are not at stake. So all schools who are hosting online classrooms too will have to ensure that they have a proper grievance mechanism in place, have a grievance officer, have his name and email ID displayed, because you're not supposed to exercise due diligence under the law. So one such area is have a grievance mechanism. And like I said, for gauging the online attendance of your students, I think schools have already started to look at facial recognition, but it becomes very important that your facial recognitions are adequately protected with legal policies, and some basic cybersecurity mechanisms would have to be instilled so as to ensure that there are no breaches. Well, a policy on the schedule is also required, because how are you trying to give information to your students regarding the schedules of your online classes? So I think there has to be specific policies spelled out in this regard so as to ensure that there is no due diligence or lack of due diligence that has been adopted by you. I think one specific policy would be a good option in this regard. Next slide, please. So there are no guidelines, there are no magical phenomenons, but basically, a lot of cyber crimes are seeing a lot of different avatars. I think when you look at the online learning management system, the nucleus is very simple. Sensitize students, parents, teachers, and faculty with regard to these guidelines, and then increase the security settings, have an understanding on what kinds of security mechanisms have been used by your online LMS. Report abuse whenever you have any kinds of instances that you face online, whether it's an abuse, whether it's a defamation, whether you are stuck with a cyber attack in the middle of your classroom. Do report that abuse to your online LMS or your video conferencing provider, to ensure that you have done your due diligence. And more specifically, I'd just like to tell you something here. If you do not intimate, and if you have any such thing, I would request all the faculty to immediately bring that to the notice of the school, because if you don't do that, then the school could put the complete liability on you. So you as teachers and faculties do have to sensitize yourselves to the fact that in case there is an abuse happening, I need to report the same. And it's not important that we just sanitize our hands alone, but during this period of pandemic and corona, it's important that we sanitize even our pictures. You delete the metadata while you're sharing out the pictures and information online. There are a lot of tools that are available to you online that help you to delete metadata. So sanitize your pictures before hosting them. And cybercrime.gov.in is the portal that the government has come up with for reporting any cyber criminal activities. I think once you're trying to have any issues, the immediate option I would say is change your platform. See, that would be enabling you to instantly cut off that cybercrime to that extent. See, I think a lot of these are learning lessons that you and I have to look into. And specifically, the online learning would bring in a lot of elasticity, and a lack of policy vacuum would expose not just schools, but also expose faculties to legal exposure. There are lots of instances that are happening today, and digital coronavirus is one such newly emerging virus that has come up with in the present world. I think a lot of virus and malware is generated in the names of digital corona. So I would urge you not to have any kinds of information being specifically clicked on during the online classrooms. So I would request that all the faculties do not share out links of any of the materials, because the moment you're putting up third-party links, you would have to face accountability in case there's a security breach from that particular organizations' websites. So be resilient. So cyber resilient. Once an attack takes place, how fast, how quickly you can come back to normalcy. That's all is about cyber resilient. I think we need to do that. The moment you're increasingly using cyber resilience, I think that will propel our growth and ensure that we have an effective functioning of online management systems. Next slide, please. To conclude, I would say that a culture of cybersecurity needs to be adopted. It's no longer paying lip service to cybersecurity. I think we all have to go and look at our due diligence, look at our roles and responsibility in the light of cybersecurity. And a cybersecurity culture has to evolve as time passes by. And more specifically, due diligence under the law would also be required to be exercised. And for those faculties who are making use of online classrooms, it's very important. If you're using these tools through your browsers, you stay updated with your browsers, keep on updating them, because if you're not doing that, you're automatically invoking cyber security breaches and cyber crimes. Because be alive to the fact that a lot of these browsers are getting themselves content constantly updated. So this is something. And having these policies would enable you to be cyber resilient, and would enable you to be having some kinds of cyber security in place, so as to ensure that your breach as an intermediary, a liability as an intermediary goes down to the bare minimum. I think post lockdowns and post COVID, there would be a lot of new different regulations that will be coming in. A lot of schools are also trying to cut down on their faculties with regard to cost cutting. They're trying to remove their faculties. I think a lot of labor law related issues are also going to emerge, and a new cyber world order is likely to emerge. I think a lot of the entire law is seeing itself in a different paradigm. And in case you do not wake out of your deep slumber, I think your exposure to legal liability would be to the bare maximum. So have innovative approaches, stay prepared, and stay cyber hygiene, and behave with cyber maturity, so as to ensure that your exposure as a school, as a education institution, as a faculty goes to the bare minimum. So what is necessary is only what is required. I know that there is a lot of information that is available, that is shared. I know that a lot of things would have gone over and above your head, but given the paucity of time, I think I just tried to bring in some of these aspects that are possible. Well, this is not an illustrative, these are only illustrative examples, but are not exhaustive. So that's all I have from my side. I thank all the participants. I thank specifically the teacher.in, a wonderful platform, and specifically Mr. Giri, Ms. Rashmi and Varsha, and also Liffin for this wonderful opportunity, for ensuring that this webinar went in a smooth and seamless manner. I thoroughly enjoyed talking to you. It's a pleasure talking to all of you. I'm open to questions in case we have time. But otherwise, it's been a pleasure talking to all of you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Sushanth. It was indeed a very informative and a wonderful session in the time where we are all online, sitting at home and working and studying and learning. I think this session was really informative. The first question I have is from Mr. Giri. Mr. Giri, if you can take it forward.
First of all, more a sort of a wrap up than a summary than a question. Thank you so much, Sushanth. Truly appreciate. It is a topic where all of us here today, and we've had 500 full in this room, and we had another 200 plus people getting onto other platforms like YouTube Live to watch this talk. So that explains how people feel. I must first speak for our teachers. I think a lot of us must be thinking, a few years ago, I got into teaching. They said no punishments. Now I'm in teaching and they're telling me right to privacy. Now they're telling me I can't ask the child to show the marks card. What am I doing? Am I supposed to teach, or am I supposed to be worried about all these things? I think our sympathies are with all the teachers in this given environment, because it is so new and we are all getting into it clueless. I loved his statement of digital corona. I think as teachers, we are more affected by digital corona than corona. And that's because we have no clue. And that's the reason we at the teacher.in decided to take up a topic like this. because we will always do well in our physics and chemistry and maths as teachers with or without the training programs we get. But these are such gray areas. And I really, really appreciate Sushanth for taking the time and being with us. I have
just one second. I just want to make one statement because this early morning, I got one instance. So I just thought of just sharing that tip also to all our teachers who are present in this webinar. In case you're sending out your meeting links or your classroom links to students, apart from just doing that, put up a note in the email, specifically in the subject column. And I'm sure that each and every teacher has some unique element and which can gauge and identify them specifically. So do add your unique element in that so as to ensure that it is you, not anybody else who's trying to send that meeting link. So I thought of just sharing this piece of information so that because we're moving to the world of artificial intelligence where there is no human intervention, but just to ensure that we are on the right path, I think this is a valuable advice that I thought of sharing with all of you. In the subject, do include something unique that is unique to you and that specifically identifies you among your students. So this is one point that I would just like to emphasize on. So that's all. Thank you.
Well, Sushanth, I must also share that today we've not only had school teachers, we have a lot of college faculty also who have joined this talk. In fact, my first question is from a person who helped us put this talk together. Her name is Bhagyalakshmi. She is the head of Star TV India, and she's also attended our talk today. She knows Sushanth well, and she helped us get Sushanth, who's an authority on this subject. So first of all,
I must really thank her at the outset. Thank you, Bhagya. Thank you so much for this wonderful connect.
Yeah, and we managed to get her into the room, though she initially saw all 500 full. Thank you so much, Bhagya. Her question is important, and it's a larger question. She says, a lot of our children use WhatsApp, we use WhatsApp, and people speak of encryption in WhatsApp. How true is encryption with relation to WhatsApp? Sushanth.
Specifically, see, I mean, so much so that WhatsApp has been publicizing that it's end-to-end encrypted. Yes, to an extent that it is reasonably encrypted. But on the other hand, what it has not modified in its terms and condition is talking about this public information. So this is a very big twister because the moment it is talking about encryption on one hand, and it is trying to say that the information becomes a public domain on the other hand. And once it becomes public information, no legal protection can be sought for such information, and no due diligence obligations are required to be exercised by WhatsApp for that particular piece of information. It's a very intelligent move of just putting in a nice amount of patch on its vulnerabilities. I think, yes, using WhatsApp, we can feel that all the eggs are in the basket, but ultimately we do not have any idea which is going to be cracking when.
All right, Varsha, your questions from the teachers, please, and then we can move on. Varsha?
Yeah, yes. Mr. Sushanth, can I please request you to turn on your camera because all the teachers are requesting to see your face.
Okay, at the minute I'm not able to do that because I'm running out of my mobile battery. So in case I do that, maybe I'll run out. So that's the only thing.
Sure. Okay, no problem. I have multiple questions.
We'll keep Sushanth as a cyber mystery.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes.
I think. Yeah. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I have multiple questions. The first question I received is, people want to know how do they know if they've been hacked or if their security has been compromised? The basic first steps.
Okay. See, there is no magical answer to this, but all I would request them to do is that if you're trying to have any of your profiles on social media, or you're trying to have these meeting links that you're trying to share, I would urge you to just check up if all the students are rightly entered, or whether what is the mode of sharing out these details to the students, whether all of these are put up in a proper way, and do your due diligence, do a Google search about yourself, try to check up what's there about you on the Google. If there is anything that is written, do report it. So I think that is the only way that you can do currently to know whether you're safe or not, because all these dimensions are just changing on a daily basis. There could be lot of uncharted territories and mysteries, and that is the entire cyber reality. So we have to be constantly alive to that. So I would only say that do a Google search about your name specifically in order to ensure that there are no fake profiles, or there is what is written about you anywhere on the internet, because thanks to Google, it is gauging everything that is available on the internet and giving me some kind of information.
Thank you. Another question that I've received from multiple teachers is that teachers and schools are taking multiple precautions, but despite enabling waiting rooms, admissions, and login and details, they want to know whether there is there's still a risk of data being hacked or the security being compromised, security breaches, despite taking multiple measures.
Absolutely, absolutely. See, we are relatively living in a reasonably safe digital environment, because nothing as such is safe. But like I said, but basically, if you're able to do your due diligence of having these basic security measures in place, having specific policies, having specific guidelines in place, I think your liability could be reduced. But that does not immune you from cyber threats. The only way that you could do that is, yes, just try to ensure that you have proper securities in place, so that you will not be targeted today. You may be targeted way down in the future. So everybody has to be targeted some day, some or the other day, but only that we will try to delay our target by few more days.
Okay. This question is from a teacher from Hyderabad. He
Okay.
wants to know that in case this person or the institution has been hacked, what is the first measure that he or she needs to take, or the
The
institution
first
needs
thing
to
is
take?
report. There's that website that I've shared, cybercrime.gov.in. First, you can file a report with that in that portal. The second thing is just try to understand to what extent you have been hacked. So understanding that would be very critical, because what kind of information is leaked out, we need to do a risk assessment, understand where are the gaps, and then try to see what is actually taking place. So I think those are the first initial steps that we could use as individuals or as teachers. So first understand that, and always ensure. See, I want to also instill this kind of a scenario in this question, because a lot of times I see that the default passwords are not being changed. We feel that once a password is there, it is here for a lifetime. But unfortunately, a lot of times it's not the schools, but also the admins of these portals, or of the portals of schools, or online people who are trying to have these meetings. They try to have a common default password. I would encourage them not to do that. Have an alphanumeric passwords, and keep on changing your passwords just like you change your toothbrushes. So this is a simple thing that you could do. And the moment you get hacked, notify, and notify on this portal, raise a ticket on this portal. And if you're wanting to lodge a police FIR, you can also do that. And then these two could be the initial measures that you could have in place once you get hacked. But it importantly becomes important that you know that you're hacked. That is a big challenge. More than this, the situation is that most of the times we do not have an idea that we have been hacked, and only once there is a financial loss that we have, or a reputation loss stake that we have, that only comes to reality, and that molds of that the fact that we have been hit with a cyber attack. So in identifying that we are being hit by cyber attacks is one of the most difficult challenges today.
Thank you. I found this question to be really interesting. This is about GPS. Now that GPS has been installed in school buses and all that, so a teacher wants to know if it is possible to access this data or breach this data.
Yes, this could also be accessed, and this could also be violated, because the moment you're putting a GPS on, it's a device ultimately. Ultimately, this device is automatically connected to the net. So we're seeing a lot of data breaches, cyber security breaches that are taking place. So it's as good as, yes, the moment you have proper precautionary things in place, for example, setting out a password in that, having a proper, if you're having a GPS device, it's okay. But nowadays, a lot of people are not using devices. They're using a mobile phone instead of that, because all these Google Maps and the other geographical maps are not staying updated in inbuilt devices, but they're only staying updated in the mobile applications, very specifically. A lot of these cars, I have GPS in my car too, but the inbuilt GPS is not really updated. So to stay updated, we constantly make use of mobile phone. And you making use of mobile phone, yes, there are lots of security things that you need to keep in mind, because you could have a lot of applications being installed, and the app that you're trying to use, and the kind of what do you say, SIM card that you have in place, the due diligence on the security of the mobile phone also need to be taken into consideration. Unfortunately, see, there was one more such mechanism, but that has not seen light. There was something called geospatial legal bill, so for which it is still in the bill phase only. It has not yet been discussed and then introduced and become, and it's not yet been made an act. Had that come into picture, every provider who is making use of geographical indicators or maps would have to seek appropriate license from the government of India, and only to the licensed guys GPS would be enabled to be made use of for any other purposes other than personal purposes. So unfortunately, that law has not come up in the country, but I think that kind of a mechanism will put down certain cyber crimes, because at least there are only authorized personnel who are operating it.
Okay. Again, this question, yes,
Sorry,
Mr.
okay, go on. I have one question, a very nice one. Can I interview?
Sure.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm audible. Okay. This is a very nice one. Sushant, some principals are asking, they normally sign an NDA or they sign a legal document or a memorandum of understanding with a third-party service provider. Would you advise that that third-party agreement, which is largely provided by the service provider, needs to be vetted by a lawyer?
Obviously, definitely it has to be vetted, because the reason is that all these NDAs, by and large, are one-sided. And secondly, my experience in this domain to tell you that all of these are cut, copy, paste. They're actually complying to this agreement in breach rather than in practice, because they do this cut, copy, paste from the internet, and they do not have clear guidelines. Even the data that is shared, confidential information, is not adequately enough to cover any kinds of cyber security breaches or data breaches, because these are ready-made templates that are available. They're not specifically customized, and the service providers would be usually trying to take the other side and say that, look, if I'm in choppy waters, my liability is zero. But we need to understand whether that's actually the practical scenario or not. So I would definitely recommend that you have custom specific NDAs being signed, and a memorandum of understanding is just a precursor. It is just a proposal being made. So that does not have any. In case I have an initial discussion with the party, but I have not finalized on what is the specific rules and responsibilities that each of us will have going forward with regard to the services. So I think proper agreements need to be made, and specifically online learning and on video conferencing related data and information needs to be included into the ambit of NDAs, so as to make them liable for any breach that's happening specifically with regard to this online classrooms and online educational
Got
portals.
it. So you're saying schools can't be innocent and just sign, agreements they would normally sign with a vendor or someone in a circumstance, especially like this?
Absolutely. And more specifically,
I have a supporting question.
Go ahead.
It could be a cute question, but a very relevant question. A teacher texts me, can I legally tell my school I won't teach online? It's a
wonderful scenario, but I will supplement it with one another question. The very fact that you're using mobile phone, I think that itself is even more dangerous than teaching online. So when you're legally prepared and having a mental peace, that's why I said maintaining a social distance is a far more relatively easy phenomena. But maintaining a distance to your mobile phone and social media is the toughest to do. I think that's the best kind of punishment you can give to anybody today, rather than even death penalty. This is the most critically, what do you say, impacting punishment that one could give in case of any, of these breaches that are taking place.
Okay. I think, Varsha, we can take one last question from you, and then we'll probably put together a do's and don'ts document and share it with the schools. I think we'll do that. I think two things I just wanted to capture, because a lot of these things could have gone in passing. Teachers, I know this is a topic which can actually be a whole day seminar, but we just tried bringing in more an eye-opener of a session. So we know what we are doing before we blindly jump into what we are doing. So what is very important, I think, which Sushanth mentioned, and a couple of people have mentioned that in the chat box, saying it's a beautiful point, is every school needs to have a cyber policy. Is that correct, Sushanth?
Absolutely. See,
Okay.
more specifically in the domain of getting to online or digital classrooms.
Okay.
See, because
So a policy is
specifically a lot
important.
of things, policies. See, what I would recommend and advise is that if we can have one dedicated session on the policies and the legal frameworks, that could really help and bring about a lot of insight and information to all the teachers and all the faculty, all the educational institutions, because they would be able to understand what are the basic guidelines that come into place here, what kinds of due diligence should I have to include specifically in these documents.
So we in
I think
fact
it
have
would
a
be interesting to
specific, sorry, we have a specific feedback where someone has said, can you please arrange another session after the government announces the policy? Because I think that's a very good point, because someone like you may be able to interpret it in a better way for us to understand. I have one more specific question. Some of these questions would be simple ones, but I think it's very important for teachers and schools. Does the school require a parent consent before starting online classes?
Of course, definitely. My answer would be a big yes to that, because today, whatever you're doing online, whether it's any kind of classroom that you're doing online, specifically involving students, would require consent from parents, because we are treating this as on par with your legal agreements or contracts. And the law specifically states that consent from a minor or agreement with a minor is per se illegal and not valid. So therefore, it becomes very important that you take the consent of the parent, as well as if there's no parent available, a guardian who's typically in charge. I think the consent also needs to be captured in an informative and informed manner. There are also lots of legal provisions that tell you about how the consent needs to be captured, which is legal, which is not legal. I think that has to be specifically looked into in this aspect as well.
Okay. Varsha, before I hand over to you for the last question, teachers, educators, friends, Sushanth's contact details are flashing on your screen. Just take a photograph of that. You might want to mail him or get in touch with him. His organization would be more than happy to help you structure, sort of guidelines for your school, or a policy draft, or whatever you require. More than anything, I think all of us need to know a cyber law expert. And in the research we did with people, I want the schools to also understand our normal law is very different from cyber law. So you will require a cyber law expert, even if you have a lawyer who's advising your school. Am I correct on that as well, Sushanth?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. See, because there are some specific key areas that are to be looked into here, and then specific legal nuances have to be looked into, and that's exactly what we do. We work on the intersection of law and technology in our law firm, and I'm one among the 45 cyber law auditors in the country who's specialized in drafting out these policies and terms of use for online platforms.
In fact, if I'm not wrong, you all advise normal lawyers on cyber law. Is that correct?
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
We do that.
Okay.
Because there are lots of companies who come to us despite having a legal team on the specific nuances of the intersection of law and technology. So I think this becomes a very innovative and a specialized niche area of practice, because lots of things come into picture. I'm also a certified cyber forensic professional, cyber crime investigator, cyber crime analyst, digital evidence
You
analyst.
said cyber forensic, is it?
Yes, absolutely. Because the
I
main
had
idea
not
is
heard
whatever is the data that you're collecting today. See, I was just talking that any of these could be legal evidence. So how do you bring out the evidence from a digital medium is what forensics is all about. So specifically guiding them on the processes that need to be adapted. How do you ensure that the evidence being submitted to the court is not tampered? So there the forensic examination comes into picture. Though I'm not into active practice in these domains, I've just confined to the advisory level, because this require 100% dedication. Since my
Okay.
core area of expertise is the legal front, I have just got specialized into these areas just to have the understanding of how things work.
Okay, Varsha, your question, and we'll wrap at that because
Yes.
it's almost close on 12 noon. Yeah.
Before I ask my final question, I'm getting messages from multiple principals and school heads, including Ms. Cheryl from Kuwait, a principal from Kuwait. So all they want is they would definitely want a document with do's and don'ts so that the schools
Yeah.
are cyber safe. With
Yes.
that, I will ask my last question. This is from multiple teachers. They want to know the key points to keep in mind when selecting a digital platform with respect to cybersecurity.
Okay, excellent. I think it's a very good point that you've pitched in. I will say that there are no golden rules, but these are the four fundamental aspects that you can look at. The first thing is look at a privacy policy. Look if your LMS or your digital platform has an adequate privacy policy. In privacy policy, what kind of data is collected? How is that data collected? For what purpose it is used? To whom all is it shared? Why is it shared? So how long is it retained? I think these are the 6 parameters that you need to keep in mind while assessing a privacy policy. I will not be able to completely shell out these because these require a separate session as such. And instead of just giving you the do's and don'ts on a piece of paper, I would recommend that we have a session on that, so that by and large I could tell you and then come up with some specific guidelines also. Because simply putting the do's and don'ts in this domain, trust me, even companies are not able to really follow the guidelines, because there are lots of companies that have approached me specifically in the light of the new notification that has come up, where they can activate up to 33% of their staff, specifically by and large IT and ITES companies, since that is our major area of expertise. So a lot of twists and turns are happening around. So I would recommend that instead of giving you the do's and don'ts on a paper, I will recommend that we put it on a slide like this, have a discussion, so that you're more abreast and then you're more alive to the practical and ground realities. So privacy policy is one. Look at the terms and conditions, the second aspect. The third aspect, look at the content ownership, the third aspect. Fourth aspect, look at whether there is a specific grievance mechanism, because every platform is supposed to have a grievance mechanism. Ensure that there's a grievance mechanism. The moment you have all of these four, I would recommend that you select your platform accordingly. If not, think twice, because you're not exposing only yourself to legal liability. You could be exposed to students, faculties, and the other people who would be attending the online classrooms. So all of these people join together, they can file something called a class action suit, where it's not going to be one versus two, but it is going to be one versus enormous people. So that will impact you economically, financially, and legally, if not on an individual front. So I think these are the four parameters that I would advise you to keep in mind: privacy policy, terms and conditions, content policy, or a specific policy relating to the intellectual property. The fourth is having a grievance mechanism. So ensure that these four are actively present on your LMS. And more specifically, if you're having international students, do check out specifically if you're looking at, there are specific countries, data protection and privacy laws that will come into picture. We look at California, you have a California Consumer Privacy Act. When you look at the Singapore has a dedicated law. Unfortunately, we're still working. We do not have a dedicated cybersecurity law as such in India. But the personal data protection bill is in the making. I think once that's passed, that will bring about a lot of answers to these mysterious questions. I think these are the four things that I would recommend each of you to have in mind before you're selecting a digital provider, and ensure that you also have some adequate policies in addition to these, so that your exposure your due diligence is adequately complied with, and you as a platform selector do not face any legal issues tomorrow from the faculty, students, and parents going forward in the way of life. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for the wonderful session, Mr. Sushanth. It was really nice. I'm getting a lot of messages where teachers are really happy that a lot of their cyber queries and points were addressed. Thanks a lot. And to all the teachers who attended, like every time, we will be giving you participation certificates. But for us to know that you've been a part of this session, please send us a mail to anu@greycaps.com. That is anu@greycaps.com. That is the same ID from which you've received your login details. So please send us a mail to that email ID, and we'll be sending your participation certificate in a week's time. Also, this session has been recorded and it will be put up on the Teacher.in YouTube channel very soon. Thanks a lot, and I'll be handing over to Mr. Giri to take it forward.
Thanks so much, Sushanth. Truly, truly appreciate on behalf of all the teachers and heads of institutions. We've had some doyens in education attending today. I was seeing them. I've seen people currently on the dashboard who have more than 30, 40 years experience, and they're sitting and writing notes today. I think that's how there is a first day for all of us. And this feels like another first day in a classroom, but truly appreciate your time. Teachers, I think on your behalf, huge thank you to Sushanth for taking time and being so patient and giving us all the views. I think a lot of schools will reach out to you. Teachers, the whole objective of a session like this is not to create panic or fear, but to not live in ignorance. Our innocence can sometimes get exploited, and that's what we do not want. So the whole objective was to be cognizant of the world we live in and to be careful. While our intentions are good and our intentions are always centric to the benefit of the children, we still need to understand we live in a legal world. And like Rashmi said, we have a special session on Thursday because we could not get Dr. Mukunda on a Saturday. So Dr. Kamala Mukunda, fantastic writer. It's a book every educator must read, is something I keep saying. It's something we also probably stand for as Grey Caps, because we are in the questioning business, so to say. So Dr. Kamala Mukunda will join us on Thursday, 10:30 a.m. and not Saturday. And that does not mean we do not do the Saturday session. Bala sir, who was supposed to kickstart this, will bat later in the order. He was supposed to be our opening batsman, but we're hoping to get him on Saturday. So we may have a double header on Thursday and Saturday, but we'll announce that shortly. And of course, those are topics which would be far less scary than what we had today. But truly, truly appreciate the amount of time that we've all taken here today. Wonderful to have had all of you. Can I